Since their first introduction into hospital in Aberdeen in 1982, MRI scanners have revolutionised the world of medicine. They allow us to look inside the human body in amazing clarity and detail.
I think it took a while for us to realise just how really valuable it was going to be.
So as far as I remember, in total, we looked at about 1,000, we had about 1,000 patient referrals on it.
The number of lives saved by MRIs, I don't know what it is, but it must run into millions. And Mark I was absolutely crucial in that development. You really can't underestimate how important it was.
In the late 70s, there were several teams around the world working to develop the technique of nuclear magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI as it became known. The team in Aberdeen that would ultimately be the first to develop a fully functional whole-body scanner was led by Professor John Mallard.
Now there were other people trying to do it, and to some extent they got the limelight. They were going up, they were first imaging fingers, then wrists, then arms, and so on, gradually working up in size. But I knew very well that in a hospital you've got to have something that can image anywhere in the body.
Part of the history of MRI in Aberdeen is that Jim Hutchison built a desktop scanner, literally a desktop scanner, using a permanent magnet. One of the early scans of a mouse was actually of a dead mouse. That was because images at that time took hours to collect, and the image was produced actually in the form of just a table of numbers, two-dimensional table of numbers, and that was then coloured in by hand to produce something resembling an image.
During an MRI scan, you lie in a strong magnetic field and radio waves are pulsed through your body. Roughly 60% of the human body is made up of water molecules, and when you lie in the magnetic field generated by the scanner, the protons in these water molecules all line up in the same direction, in the same way that a magnet can pull the needle of a compass. Radio waves are then pulsed through the body, knocking the protons out of alignment. But when the radio waves are turned off, the protons realign again, and in doing so emit tiny radio signals. It is these signals an MRI scanner detects and uses to create an image, as they provide information about their location in the body and can distinguish the different types of tissue in the body, as the protons in different types of tissue realign at different speeds, and so each produces a distinctive signal. This difference in the speed at which protons realign is called the relaxation time.
There were various people in the group, and there was a very influential and very clever postdoctoral research fellow there at the time too, an American called Bill Edelstein.
It was round about this time, I think it was about 77, that Bill Edelstein came into our group, and he was a really bright and go-for-it chap. Knew the technical side of it, or could learn it very quickly.
Bill was in Aberdeen for 3 years, just for 3 years, from about, I think, August or September of 1977 until the same time of year in 1980 we left. We went to the United States around July, August 1980.
There were about 6 or 8 people in the team, but Jim Hutchison was the main leading one actually working on it.
Jim Hutchison is probably the most able scientist I've ever known, certainly the most able scientist I've ever worked with. I mean, Jim is absolutely incredibly knowledgeable about not just about magnetic resonance, about electronics, and you name it, Jim knows about it.
He and Jim Hutchison, very different people, very different backgrounds, and yet, from Bill's point of view, he felt that it was a very good partnership, as it were. He had the very highest regard for the work Jim had already done in Aberdeen, and of what he learned from Jim, and from the way they could combine their particular talents and work together.
Well, we had to build big radio frequency coils, and they sort of get wrapped around the patient. Well, we were just using central heating tubing for it. So it was, it was actually built on a budget, very much so. A real Aberdeen scanner. But there was quite a lot of basic engineering going on, and that's where Eddie Stevenson was. Eddie's an incredibly creative bloke. He just got on and built a scanner. I mean, that was the first whole-body scanner in the world, built by Eddie Stevenson.
Well, Mallard wrote me a letter one day, and he said, Eddie, do you realise that with you building the MRI machine, there is 1.5 million people per day being scanned on the MRI, which amazed me, really. But you never think that what you do, it's a machine, you build it, it's in use, fine.
It must have been about July or August of 1980 that Bill Edelstein, who worked with Jim Hutchison, came across and showed me the image that we're actually looking at here. And this was a picture that had been made through Linda Eastwood, one of the PhD students, through her chest. And he said to me, "Isn't this exciting?" And I said, "Yeah, it's very exciting, but there's a lot of movement artifact due to the heart. Once we get rid of that, then we may be able to use it clinically."
One of the biggest challenges facing the team was how to generate an image of something that moves, such as the heart and lungs. The Fourier transform process, or spin warp as it became known in Aberdeen, was developed by Jim Hutchison and Bill Edelstein.
They worked into the night many times. I mean, it was a strange, in a way, it was a strange life for me, because we were newly married, and it was like, is this what it's like? And you laugh at this. I think I was an NMR widow kind of thing, talking about golf widows.
That, in fact, was us, Bill and I, working well into the late evening, trying to get things together. The computer and things were in a completely different room. It was about 100 yards away, and we were trying out various things, and things didn't work. Finally, I decided to get into the machine and be a guinea pig at about 1 o'clock in the morning. And I was so exhausted, I just fell asleep in the machine. Bill was through in the computer room collecting the image. He suddenly comes in, his arms up. "Jim, we've done it." So that was that. It looks dreadful by today's standards, but it was the first.
This sophisticated technique allows a scanner to generate an image of a moving organ without blur or artifacts, and is still an integral part of almost every MRI scanner produced today.
The name spin warp was actually invented by my wife, Meg. Star Trek was all the rage as a program, so they had warp factor and everything in it. I wasn't sure what I was going to call the method. She suggested spin warp, and it really took on as a name. And we patented the method, and that was one of the most successful patents ever to come out of Aberdeen. That has kept me going into my old age quite nicely.
I could still picture Jam here, right? On the floor, the sheets of paper, and he's got all this lines in it, and he's putting down the copper wires and sellotaping down. You know, I can still visualise him here yet, you know, doing that.
John Mallard quite rightly but knew that unless we showed its value clinically, it would perish.
Well, we were all hopping in and out, you know. But we had to do that before they would let us put a patient in, you see. We had to say, well, we know it's safe because we're still here, we haven't gone mad, you know. We haven't fallen to bits or anything, and...
It was funny that later on, MRI showed that I had spine warp. I have a scoliosis in my upper spine. The first time I saw that, I thought, oh, there's something wrong with this image. It's distorting the image quite a bit. I wonder what's causing that. Then we put somebody else into the image, and it was straight on. So we ended up diagnosing myself before we had any patients there.
Professor Mallard then said to me, could I help by getting some patients? I spoke with one or two of my clinical colleagues in the hospital, especially Dr. Christopher Smith, Dr. Chris Smith, who agreed that we could look at a patient who had malignant disease. And we knew that the poor man had a large cancer in his gullet, and when we scanned him, we clearly demonstrated that the relaxation time of the tumours within his liver were very different from the relaxation time that we'd found in normal livers.
So that was quite a breakthrough on August the 26th, 1980. And once we'd done one patient, well then of course the patient started coming over. The machine was in the building next to this one. All the patients had to be brought over from the hospital. I've got a lovely picture of Dr. Smith. He was bringing most of the patients in deep snow, pushing a patient on a trolley from the hospital over to the building where the Mark I machine was. And we had to modify the soap store, the medical school soap store, which was in our building, to be the waiting room for the patient before they went into the machine.
And within 2 years of Jim Hutchison and Prof. Mallard producing these images, we had Dr. Besson in psychiatry looking at the brain and looking at the effects of alcohol on the brain. So back in 1981, using this, almost Heath Robinson looking machine, we have a man who is studying the beginnings of our understandings of the development of dementia.
It's had a massive impact on patients in terms of there are diseases that we can see on MRI images that we could never diagnose before. They would be a diagnosis of exclusion. So we can now make a positive diagnosis based on MRI findings in many more patients than we could in the past. And we can use MRI to sensitively monitor their disease and the response to treatment.
Doing MRI scans, I'm sure if you asked your friends and family around, whether they, you're bound to know more than one person that's had an MRI scan.
And I think it was by about 1987 or so, it was a public scandal. All the leading hospitals in the States had an MRI, all the leading hospitals in Japan had an MRI, in Germany had an MRI, you know, and in Britain we only had about 6. The National Health Service just did not take any interest in it. So because of all that, all the know-how and all the manufacturing and everything was never done in Britain. So it's a typical story. You develop something in Britain, you make it work, it's a superb step forward, but America gets all the benefit, Germany gets all the benefit, Japan gets all the benefit. It makes me weep when I think about it.
This is one of the very sad things about the British industry, that there is no British manufacturer of MRI equipment. There was no funding forthcoming, there was no venture capital forthcoming, no one was prepared to back this.
As far as the clinical impact, MRI covers almost all medical specialties, from psychiatry, cardiology, oncology, orthopedics. I don't think there's any medical specialty that MRI doesn't touch or impact in some way.
I don't know what the market is these days, but literally thousands of scanners being sold every year, and each scanner's worth of the order of $1 million. So you do the maths, I mean, you're talking about $1 billion industry, and that's just the hardware.
Makes you feel you've had a successful career. There are obviously things within my career which I'd rather not have experienced, but on the whole it was successful.
Any new machine developed these days seem to be very much more done by big commercial companies rather than individual little teams of groups of half-mad scientists, you know.
It's impossible to compare one scientific breakthrough with another, or the impact that one medical development has had over another. But the one thing that most people who work in the medical and research sectors would agree is that the development of magnetic resonance imaging undoubtedly changed contemporary medical practice for the better, moving it into a new era and unlocking new doors. And a key part of this development and an important part of that story was, as Professor Mallard said, a small team of half-mad scientists.